Taehyung, hey mom and dad, he walked towards them. Jungkook, miss us? He walked as well, shrinking. Mr. John, how was the business trip? Is it successful? Taehyung broke the hug and nodded. Yes, dad. Mr. Hong agreed for joining and shaking hand with us. Mr. John, good job. He gave a proud smile while patting Taehyung's shoulder. Mrs. John, hope you didn't skip the meal because of your stupid missions, she said, looking at Jungkook with a worry and poker face. Jungkook, who was sitting beside her on the couch, chuckled. Jungkook, Mom, your son is grown up now. He knows how to take care of himself, While he rounded his arms around his mom's shoulder, his mom just shook her head cause she was done with him. Mrs. John, well, 6 months felt this year without you too, she said, looking between Jungkook and Taehyung. They both chuckled. Taehyung, now we are finally here, Mom. He hugged his mom. She hugged him back, still sitting on the couch. Mrs. John, I missed you, my boy. Jungkook, well, there are no business trips for a while, so we can actually focus on the work. Taehyung nodded. We have a meeting with Park Taewon tomorrow. Jungkook nodded. Got it. Mrs. John, ask them. She mouthed to Mr. John while pointing her eyes at Jungkook and Taehyung, who were busy talking about business stuff. Taehyung, well, Mom, I missed your hand food. Jungkook, for real, Mom, let's have dinner. Mrs. John, sure, gentleman, she chuckled. We'll cook your favorite, she said, standing up from the couch, ruffling Jungkook's hair while smiling at Taehyung, and walked to the kitchen to cook them food. Jungkook, love you, Mom, he yelled behind her. Taehyung, thanks, Mom. Mrs. John, welcome, gentlemen, she yelled from the kitchen. Taehyung smiled, looking towards the kitchen, then Mrs. John said something, catching their attention. Mr. John, well, did you get to know about the main culprit? Suddenly there was a serious and cold tone when he asked about the culprit behind his friend's death. Taehyung, no Dad, our guard's working, but recently they found out that there must be a spy with us who is working for them, he said with a cold and serious tone. Mr. John, a spy? He frowned his eyebrows. Jungkook, yes, Dad, but we are unable to find him as he is working so smart. But don't worry, Dad, he can't escape for so long. Taehyung, we will soon find him out. Jungkook, but just make sure that Mom is safe at home. Mrs. John, well, don't worry about it. As long as I'm with her, she's safe. But I need you to look after yourselves. Taehyung, don't worry, Dad. We're keeping an eye on everyone. Jungkook, we don't trust anyone. Anyone can betray us. Mr. John, good. I'm glad you understand this, other than judging. Jungkook, of course, Dad. It's about young parents. We will surely work hard to find those assholes who are behind this whole game. Taehyung, he looked at Jungkook and gave a light nod. Thank you. Jungkook, don't thank me, Young. It's our duty to help you with this. Don't worry, we are gonna make it soon. Taehyung nodded. Mr. John chuckled. You raised him well with you. Taehyung chuckled. He is grown now. That's when Mrs. John gave a bombastic side eye to Mr. John from the kitchen. He nodded, getting her, and turned to Taehyung and Jungkook. Mr. John, well, there is another thing I want to discuss. Mr. John, but we will discuss it while doing dinner. For now, go and take a warm shower. You must be tired from the long journey. Jungkook said, my inner thought. Taehyung, okay, Dad. They both stood up. Few minutes later, Taehyung, the food is really tasty, Mom, he said, giving a light smile while chewing his food, his hand grabbing a fork and knife. Mrs. John, have more, son. Jungkook, no wonder I love this, while enjoying his food. Mrs. John just smiled at them, but then looked at Mr. John and mouthed, ask them now. Mr. John nodded, closing his eyes and showed his hand, mouthing, don't worry, and then smoked after taking a bite. Mr. John, well, as he said, Taehyung looked at him and Jungkook listened, still chewing his food. Taehyung, do you want to say something, Dad? He asked. Mr. John, yeah, he nodded. Jungkook, what is it, Dad? Cutting his food with a knife. Taehyung, it is about our mission. Mr. John, no, it's about your personal life. Keeping the fork in his plate and looking at them. Jungkook, go ahead, Dad. He said, chewing his food without looking at him. He was so busy eating. Mr. John, it's actually about your marriage life. As Jungkook heard that, he stopped eating and lifted his head. Taehyung just gazed at Jungkook and then back at Mr. John. Taehyung, marriage? Mr. John, You guys already 24 and 25 now, so it's better if you get married, and it's gonna help our business growth too. Jungkook, Dad, you're not gonna start that marriage stuff again. I already told you many times that I don't wanna get married. Mrs. John, you don't talk, little man. You always have been the problem. Taehyung, but Dad, how it's gonna help our business growth? Mr. John, well, the partners we saw for you are my friend's daughter, and if we become one, then it's surely gonna help our business future. Jungkook, wow, you already saw the brides too. Mrs. John, Jungkook, she glared at him. Taehyung, well, Dad, but we can't spare any time for these relationship things. Jungkook, exactly. We got no time for any relationship. Mr. John, well, he is my best friend and he is also a mission to find out the mother of Mr. Kim. So if you get married to his daughter, then it will also help our business and also build our friendship stronger. Taehyung, okay dad, as if you say so. Jungkook stood up. I think I'm full. Good night. He turned and walked to upstairs. Mrs. John, Jungkook, but he already left. The anger one never listens. Mr. John, we can talk with him later. What do you say, Taehyung? Taeyong, if this provides profit to you or helps you in making your friendship stronger, then I'm okay with this, Dad. Mrs. John smiled. That's my son. Taeyong, it was your plan, Mom, wasn't it? He looked at his mom. Mrs. John, oops, did I get caught? Chuckled, maybe. Mrs. John chuckled at them and began to eat while Mrs. John patted Taeyong back. Mrs. John, well, can you talk with Jungkook and make him agree for this? Taehyung, I'm not sure, but I can try. He nodded. He came to his room and ran his hand through his hair in frustration and talked to himself. Marriage, marriage. I don't know why they are interested in my relationship stuff more than me. He mumbled, but then his eye fell on the bedsheet, which is little crumped. He frowned his eyebrows. And then his eyes followed the way to the window. When he noticed it closely, he saw a shadow which is slowly disappearing. His eyes darkened with confusion. He immediately called his guard, closed the main door, and searched all the garden and balcony. If you find anyone who is suspicious, then bring him to me. Sure, boss, the guard said from the side. Jungkook nodded, even though the guard can't see him, and then cursed the call. He stood near the window, but then he heard a knock on his door. Get in, he said and turned to the door. What's bring you here, Hyung? Taehyung, what were you doing? Jungkook, not so important. Have to say something? Taehyung nodded. Taehyung, have to talk with you. Jungkook grabbed a cube from his nightstand and nodded, sitting on near desk. Jungkook, go ahead, he said, playing with the cube. Taehyung, well, you heard that, right? Jungkook, about marriage stuff? I'm not deaf though. Taehyung, then why did you leave the place without answering? He asked, keeping his hands in his pocket. Jungkook, you already know the answer, Hyung. Taehyung, yes. Jungkook, a big no. He threw the cube towards Taehyung, which he caught very nicely, and started to play with it. Taehyung, think again, brother, 'cause it's gonna profit us. Jungkook, doesn't matter. I'm not interested in this marriage stuff. Taehyung, do you think I am? Jungkook, yeah, Dada's boy who you just agreed for him. Taehyung, then you can agree for mom. What's the big deal? Jungkook, you know how much I hate ladies, right? Taehyung, no one told you to stay as a couple. It might seem like a marriage for the world, but we can say distance it. Jungkook, so are you gonna ruin their life? Taehyung chuckles. There is nothing to ruin. I guess the girls feel the same. Jungkook raised his eyebrows. How are you so sure? He tilted his head. Taehyung, I heard Dad talking to his friend about making his daughter agree for this. Both Dad and his friends arranged this marriage without ours and those girls' consent. So that means they want the same. So let's say yes. The girls themselves will say no. Jungkook, what if they say yes? Taehyung, do you think any girl will like to marry a mafia who looks as scary as us? Dare them. Jungkook, so we are agreeing for this? Taehyung, we have to, for our parents. Jungkook nodded. But even in case we are married, then I'm not giving a heck. Taehyung threw the cube at him. That's up to you. Good night, he said, keeping his hands on his pocket and leaving the room. Jungkook, night. Jungkook looked at the cube and it was already solved. Smart indeed, he said, looking at the cube. But then he got a call from the same guard he called it earlier. His eyes darkened and his face turned into a serious one when he lifted the call. Anyone, Michael? He asked, turning to face the window, looking down. Michael was standing there holding his phone, looking up at his boss with a straight face. No one, boss. We find nothing, he said from the side. Fine, but keep an eye, Jungkook muttered. Sure, boss, the guard replied. Jungkook cut the call and nodded at Michael. Michael bowed slightly and left to do his job, which is guarding the mansion. Jungkook glazed around the garden one last time and then closed the window, going to sleep. Two eyes glared towards the window from behind a tree. The same shadow appeared on the ground. He kept glaring towards the window. His eyes were red. He was sweating as hell. Suddenly he got a phone and he lifted it. All clear, boss. I'm fine. The man nodded, brushing his phone against his ear, and then said last time before cutting the call. Don't worry, boss. I will take care of it. Saying that, he walked away, disappearing in the dark.